As things continue to go absolutely berserk in the world and our country continues to disintegrate, many Canadians still seem to be looking at our situation with a squinted ecliptic focus that doesn't go beyond the leaf of Canada, blocking out the remainder of the picture. But the whole notion of
"You need to look at the big picture"
has become so homogenized that people just block that out too. But merely warning everyone about the globalists is not exactly an exhaustive examination of the situation. In the meantime, the wreckage continues behind the scenes. So it occurred to me that instead of saying people need to look at the big picture, I should borrow a phrase from John Perkins and say you need to look at the story behind the story. Perkins, the author of the books Confessions of an Economic Hitman, would say that if you want to find the truth, you have to look at the story behind the story. And I say books because the few words from the introduction I'm about to read are from his new expanded version. He writes, "I'm haunted every day by what I did as an economic hitman. I'm haunted by the lies I told back then about the World Bank. I'm haunted by the ways in which that bank, its sister organizations, and I empowered U.S. corporations to spread their cancerous tentacles across the planet. I'm haunted by the payoffs to the leaders of poor countries, the blackmail and the threats that if they resisted, if they refused to accept loans that would enslave their countries in debt, the CIA's jackals would overthrow or assassinate them. I wake up sometimes to the horrifying images of heads of state, friends of mine, who died violent deaths because they refused to betray their people. Like Shakespeare's Lady Macbeth, I try to scrub the blood from my hands, but the blood is merely a symptom." The book is certainly a compelling read, and as grim as his stories are, he doesn't even take it all the way, and there still remains a story behind his story. And in short, that would be Gary Webb and Dark Alliance and the true story of Iran-Contra. And that story would be Guns for Drugs. But since the CIA eliminated Gary Webb, George Webb has now picked up the flag to keep that story alive. The Guns for Drugs story, that is. And how it's really never stopped. And how it's like a factory. Guns for drugs. Guns for drugs. Stamped out like factory comrade. For those that would think I'm Russian bot. This isn't about left and right and libs and cons. It's about guns for drugs, guns for drugs, guns for drugs. Can I make it any clearer? It's epic madness, completely out of hand, and too many Canadians think our affairs are above it all, blocked off from all that Yankee corruption. A warm fuzzy view through the sparkling lens of the Canadian patch that acts as a security blanket and maintains an image of Canada as the global saint. And the media are writhing in desperation to prevent the shattering of that image because their whole fragile reputation is emblazoned on it. And all the media lances are spearing Donald Trump because he's the bull in the china shop that's trashing their delicate display of bullshit. It's not just a tragedy what's happening to our society, our country. It's a crime. I think the people need to localize the rage and fight what is at least a common enemy. The media. The media have been getting off far too easily and lightly and far too long with just being called fake news because their subterfuge is covering up a wide range of highly criminal activities. And among those criminal activities are the high-profile shootings or so-called active shooters and other similar events that result in serious casualties. We all know there's never a straight story forthcoming when events such as that unfold. And one thing I learned from George Webb was to not only watch for a story behind the story, but to also look for cases where one move is covering another move. Or as he would say, the big move covers the small move. One example of that can be explored within our CBC coverage when they revisited the Charlottesville events.
A year after the shocking violence and hate in Charlottesville, white nationalists found themselves severely outnumbered at their own event in Washington. About 24 people showed up to what they had billed as a Unite the Right to rally. They were led by this man, Jason Kessler, who also organized last year's event in Charlottesville. That rally claimed the life of anti-racism protester Heather Heyer and stoked racial tensions.
Notice the day is being remembered and memorialized strictly for this outcome so they can pimp their white supremacist Nazi propaganda. Notice it isn't being remembered for, nor are you even being reminded of, the 2 police officers that were killed that day. There's no mention of their mishap, an alleged helicopter accident, A crash that was likely no accident because those officers were probably about to spill the beans about something. So the commotion and chaos provided a good opportunity to eliminate that possibility. So while unleashing the psycho in the car to drive into the crowd and cause death and destruction that can be blamed on white supremacist racism, it would provide a convenient cover for the move they were making on the officers. And anyone that thinks that they don't do these kinds of things on purpose is sadly mistaken, because they do. And that's why it's worth noting that not only do monsters like this not care if innocent people die for no reason at all, they cause the death of innocent people and don't care because they do it to hide the big lie. And that's why it's extra revolting when they stand at podiums and pretend they care. And just for the sake of interest, it's also worth noting that if one actually looks at the phrase white supremacy and how it has trended as a search interest since 2004, nobody gave a shit until Trump came along for the presidency and the media fashioned a narrative that stimulated people into caring. And in one way, one could use that spike as a visual representation of the summit of the mountain of lies they're investing in to hide the disgrace that it is they're panicking to smother. In any case, the remainder of the news report is all doom about racism and Nazis. And CBC doesn't bother reminding you of the death of those two officers because that's the story they would rather you just forgot about and don't want you poking into with any questions. So much for this big show of respect for first responders. And I'll add here that I am not saying there's never been any media coverage of it whatsoever. I'm merely pointing out how CBC are in no hurry to remind you of it. The henchmen that plot these attacks know that it's easier to muddy the waters and make one story disappear if there are two stories on the go at the same time. I'll just spin this through to the end and see how they finish it off. Reject hate? How about we reject you and your criminal lies? There are things worth hating, and you scum are certainly one of them. And this film of dirt, this disgusting, filthy blitzkrieg of lies, is standard news protocol that covers all such developments that occur in our country as well, because it's all the same horror show they're hiding, because it's all connected to the same thing. Weapons for drugs, guns for drugs, and the pillaging of resources, especially uranium. So let's return to George again, and I'll run through a little synopsis of how he would abbreviate the situation concerning the radical factions of the economic hitmen and the CIA's jackals in relation to the weapons for drugs issue. The CIA henchman pays a visit to the farmers or villagers in whatever given region, and he says, "Hey, guess what? You shouldn't grow rice, silly. Don't grow rice. You should grow opium. You'll make way more profit if you grow opium, and then you can even be like a big shot and boss people around. Oh, but you know what? You're going to need a gang to protect your opium crops, and your gang will need to have some guns. Oh, you don't have any guns? That's okay. We can get you guns. Lots of guns. Don't you worry about that. We'll just take plane loads of that opium after you harvest it and process it, and we'll get you all the guns you need." What's that about rice? Oh, food. Oh, yeah, well, as far as the rice goes, USAID will send you some rice instead. They'll do a humanitarian mission and help you. Yeah, humanitarian mission, so you become dependent on the humanitarian rice. And upon any signs of lack of full cooperation throughout the entire engagement, the first thing they do is stop sending the rice. That's it in a nutshell. Well, except for the fact that similar gangs are used to clear areas that are targeted for resource pillaging and also to protect those resources while they're being mined or pillaged. Gangs like ISIS and more similar style gang networks have been established in the United States and Canada to run the drug lines. Gangs like MS-13 were intentionally brought into the United States to protect and sell the drugs coming in by the ton. And this is the monstrosity of schemes they're protecting with all the lies. Trump is disrupting all those lies, and he wants it to stop, and he's trying to clean it up with as little embarrassment as possible to the country. You can't really blame him for that. But our government, on the other hand, is on the side of trying to cover it right up and keep it all going. And that is why our entire government is behaving the way they are. Essentially, that's why it's so critical for them that the media continue pumping out the bullshit to cover for them. Precisely why this belligerent, loudmouth, renegade manipulator is so important to Trudeau. Chrystia Freeland's background credentials are media, and she's still hardwired into the media, especially when her husband works for the New York Times. She also speaks several languages and has the Ukrainian ties, so she makes a perfect shit disturber and propaganda architect for foreign affairs. And she's right in there with the dirty lies about Ukraine. And she's right in there with Hillary Clinton, the monster. Isn't it interesting, though, that when it surfaced that Freeland's grandfather was a propaganda writer sympathizing with the Nazis, she denied it as another Russian disinformation operation? But it wasn't disinformation, it's true. And the fact that she denies it when it's true is just another example of how bold these snakes are with their lies. Especially when we see some of the media chose not to ignore it because it was inevitably true. I mean, why not just admit it and clear the air? Hey, after all, just because her grandfather was a Nazi propagandist wouldn't make her likewise by default. But the problem is, she is a propagandist, conniving with the media apparatus to spread toxic lies, just as her grandfather did. That's why she lied. That's what they do. And that stunt she pulled with that taking on the tyrant promo clearly shows her mental disturbances are vast and deep. I couldn't believe this smug bitch sitting there twitching around the way she does, beaming with deviant pleasure that she's leading a charge of treacherous propaganda to help overthrow the President of the United States of America. Her granddaddy would be so proud of her. Incidentally, that raises the subject that also among the media crimes is their participation as a collaborator in the ongoing soft coup that is occurring against President Donald Trump. So again, they're not just fake news, they're criminals. It's quite reprehensible, and I've reached the point where I'm willing to say that the only way to win this overall war is to put a concerted effort into taking the media down by proving to the ignorant masses that they're criminals hiding crimes. I give Trump a lot of credit for attacking the media the way he does, and I'm glad to see he's upped the ante from calling them fake news to the enemy of the people, because that's what they are. They're the ones lying to the public, so that makes them public fucking enemy number one. And nobody reveals and proves that more than George Webb. So I'm going to focus again on George, since this video originally began as a spotlight on him, so it's sort of become a project within a project. If the deep state is going to fall, apart from Trump, George will eventually go down in history as a key man behind the crippling of it before its fall. When it comes to the deep state, nobody digs a bunny hole like George Webb. Especially when you consider that apart from his research, he's the one in the front line trenches filing lawsuits against the likes of the Podesta Group and others. I've watched George's entire series of videos from the start of his mission, which actually began in his living room and sitting on his deck with a chart discussing the corruption of federal law enforcement agencies and their disruption and harassment targeting campaigns. That was before he sold his properties to continue his mission. And throughout watching the scope of his overall journey, it became pretty clear to me that he's digging for the truth. Nobody relentlessly digs and connects the dots better than George, and then goes out and pounds the pavement and knocks on doors and asks questions and checks locations and investigates and creates paths for others to dig, and then returns to do some more tireless digging himself. Nobody. George is even working when he's at the dentist. There are many people that attack George as some kind of sinister psyop, including his meddlesome brother. But if you're a scrunchie that has watched him from the very beginning, or at least from his earlier days, then you know that he's not a sinister psyop, but a genuine adversary of the deep state. Besides, who does that? Who sells their houses to go on the road and eventually sells their truck and lives in a hotel to stand on Capitol Hill lawn and expose the deep state to try and save the Republic? Someone that's on a mission, that's who. And it's not a disinformation mission. And you're always learning little tidbits with George, and you never know when it might be. For example, here's a little clip from when he still had his wheels.
Okay, I'm going into Canada. This is the bridge at Port Huron. This is the old overland route for the hooch from to Al Capone in Chicago.
In a quarter mile, continue on to Ontario, 402 East.
George is continually dropping breadcrumbs like that, not only because his brain is like an encyclopedia filled with endless nostalgia and history of that sort, but because the whole point he's driving at is that the entire smuggling arrangement has never really stopped. The same routes they were using to smuggle hooch back in the Capone days are for the most part still being used today to smuggle the drugs and dark weapons and so forth. And the reason many of these characters had a smirk or smile on their face wasn't the telling signs of their remorseless cold-blooded killer instincts, like the media would often say. It was because they knew the government were just as guilty as they were. From a certain perspective, the government authorities are far more disgraceful because many of the Al Capone types are true to their character and don't try to hide the fact that they're gangsters, and instead often relish in it. Whereas garbage like this, Bill Blair and other notables of his type, hide behind this gallant facade of honor and justice. It's really sickening. They're such hypocrites of the highest order. That's why they heave such effort and dedication into rendering decorative web graphics as a means to try and convince you that they care about things like the snowballing opioid calamity and how something needs to be done. More lies. And I don't mean the statistics are lies. People are dying all right. It's a lie that they care about it. How can they care about it when they're causing it? Let's join George for another quick clip where he's in Toronto and points something out.
I'm in Toronto. Nice murals here in Islington, part of Toronto here. You know, just a nice little area here, and they're dressing up a lot of the buildings with scenes of Canadian days gone by, which is nice. But right next to it is Pharmadox. Pharmadox is two things. It's methadone and it's Suboxone. And the connection to the Awans here is this company out of Las Vegas, Nevada. And there's this medical physics, they call it. So they're selling these degrees in medical physics. And the idea being that you can be a tech and you can open one of these Pharmadocs. You really don't have to be a doctor. You can go to these 2-year programs and you can get into this business of selling Suboxone and methadone. People come in and drink their daily methadone to get off their opioid fix. And this isn't just affecting the young people. This is affecting all people, young and old, coming in to get their methadone and Suboxone fix. This is and I will talk about the organization and the company later from Las Vegas that the Awans are involved in that create this network of Pharmadocs.
Now let's listen in on another clip, but this time he's in the United States and he's talking about circumstances that are of the same subject matter.
Okay, day 161, Hillary's Hackers. The thing I love about coming to the physical locations is it's just something that you don't get in the news reports. For some reason, they just don't do it. There's a place to, you know, turn your diamonds and gold in across the street from the chronic pain clinic here, and they focus mainly on, it looks like football injuries really, all these traumatic brain injuries and acute chronic pain and so forth. Then right across the parking lot here is the pharmacy, the All Care Pharmacy. I'm wondering where they get their drugs from. And then just down the street, this was one of those kind of like storybook towns during the heyday of the auto business, I think. And it just has seen better days and so forth, and trying to be revitalized. But this is the little town of Allen Park. But if you go up to the front of the window here, you see it's kind of focused on occupational medicine and so forth, and there's all the lab equipment and so forth. They do a lot of testing, and I'm wondering if it's a 7x24 situation. No, it isn't. It's closed now. This is Sunday morning. But so anyway, there's Muzaffar Awan. He's still in business here. Hematology and oncology there for the Beaumont staff. Dr. Awan looks like he got a certificate of appreciation for the most compassionate doctor there on the wall. But it just gives you a little bit of an idea of the situation. Down the street there's a physician's management system and a couple of different internal medicine folks. Just so this has kind of been taken over by these, what I would call, I don't know, retail pain clinics.
Our medical and healthcare situation has become completely molested because it's been subverted and poisoned by all this vermin that is infiltrating our countries. And this entire Awan clan are like a monolithic tribal nightmare because they're everywhere. They're dirty paws into everything. It's not a pretty picture when we've got doctors on both sides of the border filling people with dubious pills, and the doctors, it seems, are sometimes even fake doctors, or else they just compromise a doctor to get them to do what they want. Compromise is all the name of the game anyway, and based on other reports of George, it seems they really like infiltrating veterinarians because the medications involved are so potent, so they can crush them up and yield so much more when cut. There's so much horrific criminal activity going on, and the criminal media sanitized it. It was actually the sanitizing of the Danforth shooting that really ramped up my rage towards the fucking media. The cover-up was so observable, and with such young victims, it was deeply offensive to hear their fluffy terminology in describing things. One example was how the slaying of Reese Fallon was referred to as being struck by bullet. Listen here.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau attended the funeral this morning of 18-year-old Reese Fallon and then came here to the memorial site along the Danforth. This is where Reese Fallon was struck by bullets and where she died last Sunday night.
Struck by bullet. Sounds as if she was hit by some estranged bullet that materialized from out of nowhere, and death was the outcome. And that's why there were no future dramatic interviews with the witness that described how Reese Fallon was decidedly not struck by bullet, but instead gunned down first and then executed.
She was executed cold blood. The guy just saw her falling, and he turned around and shot her 2-3 times.
That's their splice of white frame that I've frozen that clip at, where they chopped out any further explanation of his about the execution-style murder. I'm surprised they even let that much slip in. However, if they were plugging this from the Nazi white supremacist angle, that guy would be the leading guest on every fucking news circuit across the country, sharing his experience of seeing the young woman being gunned down and then ceremoniously and cold-bloodedly executed with 2 or 3 more shots. But we heard no more from that guy, because that guy was telling the truth. And the media would rather you just remember that Reese Fallon was mysteriously struck by bullet.
Reese Fallon was struck by bullets
and has since passed on. It's so revolting, so unbelievably revolting. Now, that preceding coverage was from when it happened, and I see they recently came out with a news purge about the Danforth shooting, filled with more confusion. It was likely done to draw attention away from the murder of Marissa Shen. But in the news purge, I noticed they actually did make mention of the fact that Faisal Hussein did stand over Reese Fallon and executed her by filling her with bullets. But I noticed they're still trying to sell it as random, and they even contradict themselves in the latest news purge by saying he walked down the street shooting people randomly, but one witness, Jaspal Singh, said Faisal Hussein walked past him and told him not to worry, he's not going to shoot him.
A clearer picture tonight that Faisal Hussein was an emotionally disturbed loner the night he walked down a busy Toronto street shooting people at random with a handgun. One witness described seeing him stand over a woman and shoot her 4 times. Another witness, Jaspal Singh, came face to face with Hussein, but was told, "Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you."
Well, I'm afraid that doesn't sound very random, and that's because it's not. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Reese Fallon was a volunteer for the Liberal Party. To me, that indicates she was an intentional target for whatever reason, likely a warning of some sort, and the rest were just collateral damage. Especially since the new news purge claims that Hussein was in police custody 2 days before he did the attack. That tells me that they told him that he needs to do something for them, or he's going to get locked up. And that something was go on a gun rampage and murder Reese Fallon, and shoot up some restaurants and other people if you want to, but make sure Reese Fallon gets it. A warning. Then, of course, it came as no surprise that there was a drugs and weapons connection with the family. And I'm afraid I don't buy into the stories that the drugs were meant for use as a chemical weapon of mass destruction to be deployed by the brigands of the shadowy ISIS. I think they were just drugs meant for widespread mass distribution because that's what they're doing, and they use fucked up characters like these guys to do it. This is where the work and research of George proves to be so effective. Take, for example, the truck attack in New York. When George drilled down on the perp, this Saipov character, he discovers that he has all these different trucking companies that nobody mentions anything about, inevitably connected to all the uranium and drug smuggling activities. So it's no coincidence that the trucking companies seem to be involved with trucking cars. They love trucking cars because they can fill the trunks with, well, whatever they're smuggling. And I also don't think it's a coincidence that a group of foreign nationals was among the victims of the attack. But regardless of their intended target, they just make sure there's an ISIS flag found in the truck, so it seems like a signature ISIS attack, and everyone jumps on that with great vigor, and henceforth it ensures nothing more is poked into. And certainly nobody would ever consider that the whole thing was done simply because something has gone wrong with the deep state drug, weapons, and uranium smuggling activities. But that's what it is. What's more, this Saipov character entered the United States on a diversity visa program, and he brought others in via the chain migration thing. That's exactly what Trump was warning people about when he was talking about the chain migration thing immediately after that incident occurred. but he got labeled a racist for that, of course, yes indeed. However unsettling and sad as it is to say, most of the serious high-profile tragedies that happen are politically connected and orchestrated by the mechanisms married to said politics. The Fredericton shooting story is packaged with the same twisted lies, with the same stinky layer of moldy media fungus growing on top. And when they applied the media ban, the main contradiction I saw was that the written report indicated that the woman civilian was found dead in the front seat of their car with the windshield blown out. But I don't recall any of the witnesses saying anything about blown out windshields or victims slumped over in the front seat of the car. To me, that would be a disturbance and scene that would be distinctly heard and not go unnoticed. And even to this day in the Wikipedia entry it says, the 2 deceased officers were reportedly the first responding officers to the scene, and the 2 civilian victims were already on the ground when officers responded. The 2 civilian victims. But then it says, a resident of the building told reporters that he awoke to gunshots around 8:30, looked out his window and saw 3 bodies. 3 bodies. So that must mean the 2 officers and the male civilian. So those 2 statements alone contradict one another. And it also struck me as way too bizarre that the Muslim witness with her comments about bullets through her windows and into her walls suddenly disappeared. When I stopped seeing her on the news, I said to myself, no way, the only reason they wouldn't be capitalizing on the chilling stories of a Muslim is because it won't match up with the rest of the fucking lies. Otherwise, we would have seen that clip looping and looping forever. We'd still be seeing her on the news. But we didn't hear any more from her. The Fredericton shooting is another mess of lies that also smells of drug connections with whistleblower characteristics. And all these twisted tales so commonly involve mysterious people with grainy photographs. But regardless of the particulars of what occurred, the real story lies somewhere in the dark cracks and crevices that lurk behind the media story. So it's not even a story behind a story, it's a story behind a wall of lies. But the story that's still behind it all is still drugs for weapons, to arm the gangs, to pillage resources. And the drugs from the weapons becomes heroin that's brought wholesale into our country and the United States, and then more gangs, with guns, sell it. And the Islamic agenda is not a detached issue from it. Now you can choose to ignore that and not believe that, and you can think that this is all about left and right and libs and cons and dairy products. But if you do believe that it's all about left and right and libs and cons and dairy products, then the criminal media are pumped and high-five each other with delight. They certainly don't want your attention to be on this fella, standing on Capitol Hill lawn almost every day trying to spread awareness that there is a spy ring embedded in Congress and the White House, and the Pakistani mystery man that Trump made a passing comment about a while back is Imran Awan. But the media don't want you reading George's t-shirts or hear him saying things like, hey, did you know that the concept of a diplomatic pouch is no longer the size of a pouch, but a shipping container? And while keeping that thought on simmer, did you know that the latest sophisticated covert weapon systems that are being refined, like these here nifty Club K container weapons, can be operated via satellite but can't really be detected by satellite? And with pilotless aircraft and drones added to the mix, it really makes for a remarkable aggregate, wouldn't you say? Because after all, this is about a lot more than just AK-47s. And with the world busying itself so much with containers and container ships, it adds a whole new kind of strain to the exercise of where's Waldo? Where are the weapons? Wow, where are the weapons? And just like the weapons, the truth is also unseen. And so long as the criminal media can keep alive the lie that John Brennan is the patriot and Trump is the threat, then the machine will keep right on chugging along and chewing people up in the process. John Brennan knows he has the Canadian government strongly in his corner, but not only that, he realizes it's an effortless bonus because he sees zealots like Freeland will go right off the deep end to help sell the big lie. You have to wonder how someone can actually place an excerpt like this,
fake, disgusting news,
in a promo clip as an attack, when you know damn well it's true. This thing, this radioactive purple fucking dinosaur that struts around with her flunky proteges in tow, sure is causing a lot of problems for our country. In the second story, I discuss, among other things, this thing and the issue with Saudi Arabia. People don't like to hear about the big picture because it's ugly.